Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our final design session. We're going to be talking about the Sage CRE 300 customizing of financial statements today. My name is Jeanette, and I'll be your host for the presentation this morning. So this is our final session in the design series that we've been presenting. We've done a couple of sessions on Report Designer and Inquiry Designer, and this is the final session on Financial Statement Designer. All of these design programs are part of the Sage family of applications. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to review some features for the FS application. We're going to review the data file, just briefly, where the information is going to come from in your financial statement. We're going to talk about the components that make up a financial statement. And that kind of goes along with an anatomy overview, meaning the parts and pieces that you need to be aware of while you're making modifications or creating something from new. And then we'll get into the software and we'll talk about the design options that are available in FS. You should have a handout that came with an email that you received today. There's a Word document that has 13 pages. And then there's also a copy of the PowerPoint that we're looking at today. So if you've got that Word document printed out, it'll follow along pretty close to what we're going to be looking at so that you can take notes on the screens. And actually here too on the first page. So the first page of that Word document starts with features at the top. So this design program comes with General Ledger. It's not a separate application that you have to purchase like Report Designer or Inquiry Designer. When you buy General Ledger, Financial Statement Designer is bundled with that. I'm going to demonstrate to you today how to generate the default designs that will be based on your chart of accounts. So I'll remind you when we get into the program. So based on either your base accounts if you're using prefixes or your full chart of accounts if you're not, those designs will look to that chart of accounts or list of base accounts to pull them into where they need to be on each of the default designs. You can copy those designs, modify them. They're not hard-coded, so once they're created, you can modify the standard ones that have been generated, or you can even create brand new ones. Start out with a new clean slate and create your own design after you get comfortable with all the parts and areas of the Financial Statement Designer. I'm going to show you a way to streamline printing. We can group financial statement designs together in a file and have them print in that order without you having to go in and run them one at a time. You just run the file that we've created for those designs to print. The control here has to do with the streamlined printing. It also has to do with how the statement looks and how the information is arranged. So you're going to be the one in charge of controlling how it looks, how the information on the page is arranged, how it's totaled, if there's any calculations that need to be done. We call the calculations inside Financial Statement Designer expressions. So we can do simple math, the add, subtract, multiply, divide. We can also accumulate groups of accounts that may be need to be used in these calculations. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Once you get more comfortable with the design program, you'll start to develop, some more complicated report designs. Now, as far as your entities are concerned, if you have prefixes in General Ledger, I'll show you where you will set up what are called prefix groups. and you can set that group up to be a single entity, or it can be multiple entities consolidated. So you've got some flexibility there. I'm also going to show you how to design a statement so that it always prints for the same group of entities or entity without having to prompt you to enter that when you go to print the design. Okay, there's only one file that provides the information for the statement, and that's the GL master file. So it's not looking for a transaction file, a current file, or a history file. It's only going to pull information off your GL master file. So any of those fields that are available there, like the account balance or activity fields, budget information, the actual format of the account, the prefixes, and even partner information. If you've set up partners in General Ledger, we can actually create designs that will print by partner. So one file, one data file is providing the information for the statement. Now this is in addition to the design itself. So each design will have a .fsd extension, and this is where you put in your instructions for the content and the layout. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. The majority of our session is how to build those instructions into the design itself. The statement groups, we'll take a look at that. That's where you can group statements to be printed together. That file has a .fsn extension. However you put the statements into that file, that's the order that they're going to print out when you tell the system to print that statement group. For those of you that are using prefixes in General Ledger, you have to have at least one prefix group in order to run these statements. And I'll show you today how to create those groups. They can be single prefixes, they can be multiple prefixes, they can even be consolidated prefixes. So any combination of that will get your statement to print. Lastly, we have something called accumulators. These are used for calculations within the statement. One accumulator is created by default, and I'll show that to you once we get into the program. That accumulator is used for the net income amount for the balance sheet. So we need an accumulator that's going to add up all of our income accounts and then subtract all of our cost and expense accounts. And so Sage, when you first go in and create all the default files, will go through your chart of accounts, it will add up all of your income accounts, and then it will subtract out all of your cost and expense accounts. Now, if there's other types of accumulations that you need to do for certain types of accounts to get certain balances to print, that's what the accumulators are there for. You can create as many of these as you need using all the fields within the GL master file to come up with that amount, whether it's a current balance, a future balance, a previous balance, activity fields, whatever the need is for the design itself. So as far as the anatomy is concerned, what we're talking about here are three designated areas, the header, the body, and the footer. And within each of those three areas, we're going to take a look at pulling in text fields, defining columns going across the page, setting up the amount instruction, which means what accounts are going to print going down the page, filling in amounts in each of those columns. We're going to see how to assign totals to certain sections. We're going to see how to create page breaks. So if you want, instead of running over pages, if you want to designate, specific page breaks to make things look nicer, I'll show you how to do that. You can insert blank lines. So for spacing, if you want to, space things apart a little bit differently to make it look, a little bit nicer, we can do that. We can also pull images in. So if you have pictures of equipment or job sites, as long as it's in like a JPEG file type, we can pull those in, maybe print those up in the header of the statement, or even on a separate page, maybe as the cover page to the statement. All right, so that gives us kind of an overview of what we're going to look at as we get into FS. We're going to be looking at the components, the actual design, and then we're going to talk about each of these different items that we can pull into any of the three areas of the design itself. So I'm going to go ahead now and jump us into FS is the application name for Financial Statement Designer. And I'm in the Timberline Construction folder, so we'll be designing this off the sample data for you today. Now, the first thing that I would recommend that you do if you're new to Sage, or if you've never used the financial statements that come with the software, if you come into FS and you go to File, Create, this is the option that will create the default statements for you based on your GL master file. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Now, I've already done this a couple of times, but I'm going to go ahead and override this. It will automatically create the default net income accumulator. So I'll go ahead, because maybe I've made changes to my master file, I'll go ahead and say yes to override that. And then you'll notice on my screen that it's pulled in 4 windows. These are the default designs that it's created for me. I've got a comparative statement, I've got a trial balance statement, I've got a balance sheet statement, and an income statement. So all 4 of those are automatically created for me. And if I'm going to go ahead and close those, and I want to show you one other thing too. If I go into General Ledger and I go to Reports, Financial Statements, prior to doing that create, this window was blank. So if you come into GL and go to Financial Statements and there's nothing on this window, that means that no one has done the create step. You should at least see these 4 default designs out there, so that you can start running, start running the default financial statements. All right, so let's go back into FS. I'm going to go ahead here and just open up the income statement. I'll use File, Open. Now, if you want to do a brand new blank, you do File, New. If you want to modify or copy an existing statement design to a new name, use Open first, find your design. I'm going to use the income statement. And then from here, you can copy this to a new name, or you can just start making modifications to it from right here and just save it as the original name. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the body of a statement design. So that's the default view that comes up. If you want to move to the header, you just go to View and click on Header, and it takes you to the header section. Or if you want to look at the footer, go down to the footer section. All right. We're going to stick with the body here for just a few minutes, so that I can explain here what we're looking at. All right, there are 4 types of lines that we're seeing on this screen. The first type that we need to talk about is, and I'm going to highlight this line by clicking in the account header field up here at the top. This is a column instruction. This is what's telling the system what to pull out of the GL master file to print on this statement. So we're pulling the account, the title, the current activity, and the current balance. You can tell a column instruction by the fact that there are boxes around each of these headers. So that's telling us that this is a column instruction. And the other thing I need to point out here too is you see how it's kind of grayed out right here? That means this is the line that I'm on. So if I come down here to income, you see the gray block move down to the income line. This line up here, it still has boxes around the heading. That is still the column definition line. Now this line that I'm on here this is just text. So when you're looking at a line that just is black on white, this is just typed in information on this line. So text. So if you look at page 2, towards the middle bottom, the colors are what's important for you to remember. So black is text, green is an amount line. So this line is telling the system what accounts to pull in going down the page. The blue line is a total line. Okay. All right, so again to repeat, the line with boxes around the descriptions is a column identifier line. Black is text, green is the amount lines with the account numbers, and blue is the total. So we're going to start by looking at the column line. So I'm going to come back up here to the top, and I'm just going to double click. I can double click on any of these fields here at the top, and that brings me into the column options window. And what I'm looking at is this first field for account. So each one of these boxes will have its own column option window. Now, when this was designed, they used the GL field button to bring up a list of all of the fields available to you in the GL master file. So here, it starts out on the balance fields. So there's a field type here on the right-hand side. The bullet will default to balance fields, but you can go to any of these other 3 and pull fields from there as well. So on the balance fields, what we're looking at here is a list of all the fields available on that GL account. So starting with the account ID, ID itself, then the title, the owner's account. You can even get the base account if you're using prefixes, and then current balance, future balance, and so on. So everything that's on the balance tab is listed here. Everything that's on the activity tab is listed here, future, then the current, and all the prior activity buckets. If you're using budgets and you want to pull a budget field into your design, change the field type to budget fields, and you'll see all of the budget fields available. Same with cash flow fields. This is giving you all your debit activity and balances. And then you also have a list of monthly fields. This is typically used for the comparative statement, forecasting, and that kind of thing. The majority of the time, you're going to be up here in the balance fields or in the budget fields, pulling from there. The next button over is expression. Now, this is like a formula. So if you click on this, it's going to ask you to give the expression a name. This is mandatory. You have to give it a name. So we could say, we'll do an example here, maybe month-to-date variance. We'll call it that. And then you will click your cursor down into the expression field. And from here, you will select fields that you want to do the math on. Now, your math is down here at the bottom. Underneath the field list, you have plus, minus, multiply, divide, and then these 2 brackets here. If you need to calculate something prior to adding or subtracting or multiplying, you may have to put brackets around it to get that value first before you go to the rest of the expression. So in our example, we might be saying we need a budget variance, and we are going to say, give me the current budget, and then we're going to notice I double-clicked on the field, and it populates up in the expression box. I'm going to put my cursor here after the field, and I'm going to I have to click my button to get the minus, and then I'm going to come back to the balance fields, and I'm going to grab current activity. Okay. So the current month's budget minus the current period activity will give me the difference. Now, if you've got something built into your design that is an expression, you need to pay attention to this, these couple of fields here in the lower right-hand corner. Calculate, then add, then calculate. This is for the down total. So it's going to do this on each line correctly, but when I get down to the total, do I want this to be a down total, or do I want it to recalculate that expression on the total line? So if I want to add it down, I would change this to calculate, then add. If I want to recalculate it at the bottom, I would do add, then calculate. So something to be aware of, if you've got an expression and the total piece on your total line is not adding up the way you expect, this is the first thing to look for. Okay. We also have a horizontal total button here. Okay, and you have to be over in an amount column in order to get the total to work. So you just click the total button, and then it gives you the columns that have dollar amounts in them that you want to add across. Now, an example of this could be that you have multiple departments, and you're building a statement, and you're pulling current activity in multiple columns going across the page, one for each of your departments. You need a horizontal total on the right-hand side that adds those up to give you a grand total. So this would be a way to do that. You would have multiple current activity columns, and then you would add them across. All right. Additionally, on this window, you have a heading, the default heading from the GL master file. You can change that. Also, for the heading down here below, you can define the alignment, left, center, or right. You can tell it to draw a line underneath the heading. You can control the font for that heading, and you can also tell it whether it's bold, italic, and again, whether you want to underline it. Same with the columns themselves. So the information that's going to print underneath those columns, you can left, center, right. You can control the font again. Now the column type, this is for the dollar amounts, defaults to currency. You can change it to a %, or ratio or units if you're using, if you have account numbers that are units. The symbols defaults to print on the first line, then again on the totals, and then on the next line after the total. If you don't want any symbols, just change this up here at the top, or if you want it on every line, or you just want it on the first line, or you just want it on the totals. The other thing that you have here is the width. Where does this column start and end? And the system will automatically, as you place your columns in, it'll automatically compute this for you. You can change it, and I'll show you probably an easier way here in just a moment how to adjust these columns by using the square around the title. All right, buttons at the bottom. If you OK, it's going to save the change that you've made. If you cancel, it does not save that change. The arrows at the bottom, this is a way to move between the fields on this column line instead of OKing and then double clicking on the next field and OKing. Just use your arrows at the bottom and that'll move you across. So you can move left and you can move right. If you want to insert a column, insert will put the new column to the left of where you are. If you want to append, it'll put it to the right. So if I do an insert right here, I can add maybe another current activity. So I could come down here, maybe I've got multiple departments, so I can repeat the same field multiple times. And after you've selected the field, just click Done, and that brings you back. I could put a title in here. Maybe this is, let's see, we'll just change this to say Timberline Construction. And maybe I want to center this. I can play with this to make it look the way we want. And then as soon as I move out of that field, it brings it over here. So this one, I think I could just leave that, or I could put Company 2, Department 2, however we want to say this, and I can go ahead and center that. Oops, center it as well. And maybe here I want to change this to be a total. I want to total these two columns. I don't want it to be a current balance. So here I can say add columns 3 and 4 together. So what you need to do here is put your plus sign. Oh, come on, plus and plus. So it will add those two together. And I can call this total. Again, I can center it. Okay, maybe I'll change this to say Department 1. That looks better. Okay, so Department 1, Department 2, and then a total. Okay. Right now, as far as the widths of the columns are concerned, notice how these two are not exactly the same. I could, instead of going in here and trying to play with the start and ending values, I can simply grab the edge and I can drag this over, and that corrects the width for me. Okay. So a couple of ways to do that. And again, what we're defining here are the columns going across the page. Page 5 in your handout has the buttons described to you at the bottom. You can, I forgot to mention the delete button, so if you decided you didn't want one of these columns here, just highlight it, use your arrow, go over to it, and click delete, and that will take it out of the design. All right, once you have your columns defined, you may want to add some text. So what we added here was just the word income, and we just typed that in. And then use the bold and the underline buttons up here at the top so that it looks a little nicer when we print it. So you might want to put headings in to define the sections within or the groupings of accounts within your design. And then the next thing you'll want to do is notice the green line here. We need to add the amount lines to this design. Now, if it's already designed, you can just double click on it to open it up. Or if you need to add an amount line to a design, you can simply come up here to Design, Insert amount, and that will start a brand new amount line for you. Today we're just going to double click on the one that's already there, and you'll see that we have a place here for us to enter our account range in. Now this account range can be a single account, or it can be a large range or several ranges of accounts. This is a grid here that you can lock your accounts in. Now, one of the things I would suggest to you is, if you haven't already, is to come in on these amount lines and change the range so that it picks up any account number that could fall within this range. These account numbers don't have to already exist. The reason I would suggest you do that is every time you add a new account within General Ledger, it doesn't automatically add it to your financial statement design. So you may have created the default accounts and they've been running fine for 6 months, but then you add a new income account, maybe $4,200. Well, my ending range was $4,100. So when I run my next financial statement, that account will not be included and my statement will be out of balance. So I would come in on all of these lines and I would increase this range so that it will pick up, regardless of how many accounts you add in that section, it will always pick them up. And I would do that on each one of these green lines, and I'm going to show you that as we go to each one of these today. You can use your list button here, so you can list and find the account numbers that you want to pull in, or the range. You can delete a range. So remember that just like right-clicking on something is not going to, even if I'm up on this line and I right-click, that's not the delete. In some programs it is. Delete line is an option there. It's this button right here, delete range. Now the itemize, summarize option here, this is set to itemize each account. So it's going to print for us one line per account. Or we could tell it to summarize on one line. If you do that, be sure you enter a title. Otherwise, it's going to show under account and title blank and just have a dollar amount. We can indent these lines in. I'm sorry, as far as the title is concerned. And then this print test, do not print when 0 is the default. If you want every account to print, regardless of whether they have a balance or not, change this to always print. And then lastly here, this reverse sign, this will reverse debits to be a credit and vice versa. So if you have a need to do that, to change the sign on a dollar amount, you may have to put that account on a separate amount line, and then you can click the checkbox to reverse the sign. Once you have your change in, just click Save, and then you can click Close, and it takes you back to the design. So I'm going to do this here on all of my accounts. I'm going to change this so that it always picks up all my costs. Oops, well, that doesn't look right. All my expenses. So 5,100 there. I'm going to save this, close. Let's go back up to this line. It should be 1599. So anything in that range gets pulled in. My expenses look right. My other income, I don't have any other income marked, so that's why it pulled in. It just filled in a default account of 1-to-1. If you go in and add any other income accounts and want those to print on your default statement, you need to be sure you modify this line. All right, I'm going to save this design and close it, and then I'm going to open up the balance sheet. There was one other option on that amount line that we didn't talk about. And I'm actually going to come down here to net income. And before I actually pull that up, I want to show you one other thing that's a little bit farther in your documentation, but I want you to see how this accumulator has been built for net income. This is the other place that you need to change to get your ranges high enough so that if you add new accounts, again, you want to make sure that your net income amount is calculated correctly. So I'm going to change this to all 4,000 accounts as being income, and it's the current balance. And then I'm going to change this so that anything up to $5,099 are my costs. Anything over that, I'm going to change this. Now, what I could have done is just gone 5,001 to 6,099. That's another option too. But I'll go ahead and leave it broken out the way that Sage picked it up based on my chart of accounts. So I've got my income plus minus my cost minus my expenses. I'll save that and then close out of here. And then on this balance sheet design, notice down here under net income, in the current balance column, we've got dollars here, but we've got dashed lines around the dollars. And the reason that that is there is because of this button right here called Cell Overrides. We can't pull just a straight account number into this position on the financial statement. There isn't any way up in the grid to say, add this and subtract that. We have to use an accumulator to do that. So instead of trying to pull an account number here, we're going to use a cell override, and we're going to use the arrow button to move over to the current balance column. And right here, we've got the check mark in here to override the column amount, and we've said, use this field. So we told it, come over here and grab this default net income accumulator. Okay, and then that shows up back here when we save out of here, close out of here, with the amount with dashed lines around it. That's how you can tell by looking at the statement that this is a cell override. Now we can do cell overrides on any dollar column. We can also do cell overrides on totals. That's a little bit more advanced. We're not going to get into that today, but just know that that's an option as well. The other thing that we can do here is, in addition to the accumulators, we can also set up an expression. So we can create some type of an expression to pull into this column. I guess as an example, we could have accumulated all the income separately from the cost and expense separately, and then we could have done an expression that said, take the income minus the cost minus the expense. It's just an easier way to do it is with an actual accumulator. Okay, so accounts, ranges. Whether to summarize this on this particular one, we are summarizing. We've got a title. We're always printing this line. We're doing it with a cell override because we don't have the exact account numbers that we can add, subtract on this window. And there are screenshots of this example in your book on pages 7. On page 7, it shows going into the to the cell override button. All right, back on in the body here, we've looked at, just to recap, we've looked at the column assignment, we've looked at text, we've looked at the amount assignment. The next is the total assignment, the blue lines. On an existing blue line, if you click on it, you will be able to see what is adding into or subtracting from to come up with that total. So in this example, our total current assets is adding in all the account numbers that printed above. On this, we're just getting the long-term assets. Under total assets, we're adding the two totals together. Now, to assign a total, let me do a few things here to demonstrate a couple things. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in a blank in here. So just put your cursor where you want the blank, use Design, Insert Blank, and it moves things down. To assign a total, position your cursor where you want that total to print. Click on Design again, Insert Total. And watch what happens to my cursor. Okay, kind of turns into like a crosshair. Okay. What it's wanting me to do right here is it wants me to click on the amounts that I want to add into this total. Now it added something to my screen up here at the top. Notice I've got a plus, a minus, and a percent, and a close option. It defaults to add when you go in to assign a total. So if adding is what you're doing, all you do is click on the line that you want to add. Make sure that the dollar numbers turn into pluses. And then if I want to subtract something, I need to change my operator up here to a minus, and then I can click again on the amount that I want to subtract. And just make sure that you see that the pluses turn into minus signs. When you're done adding to this total line, then you click Close. And that sets it up in the design. Now, to customize that line, take a look at page 8. I double-click on this blue line. That gives me my total options window where I can assign a title. I can indent the title. So maybe I want this to come in maybe 1 inch. I can play with the title font. I can change it, even the color. I can tell it to do an underline. Now it's automatically set to a single underline. And this is before. So that's the black line that you see here above the blue 9s. I can turn that off if I don't want the lines to print. I can maybe make it print after. I can do a single or I can do a double. Now the column offset, this is what was used to move the total to kind of offset it from the accounts that are printing down the page. That's what this line up here has done. So I can offset it, and then I can also control the font. So let me OK that. Notice here's my description came in, my underline moved from above to below. Now if I click on this line, if I double click, you'll see that here is you can see the offset. You can also see they indented the title. They've got the single before, and then they've done a column offset, which is for the dollar amount. So that's where the total is printing outside of the current balance column. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and delete this instruction, which brings me to another area here. Once you start building your design and you decide you've got lines in here that you don't want, go ahead and highlight the line, come up to the top and go to Edit, Delete Instruction. When you say yes to that, it deletes it and it moves everything up. If you want to just clear the instruction but leave the blank space, then you would do Edit, Clear Instruction. Now I want to delete this blank line I created, so I'm going to delete that as well. and that moves everything back up. You can cut or copy sections, just block out a section, and you can cut that section out of the design or copy it to another place within the design. This might help if you've got multiple pages that are printing the same type of information, but it might be easier to copy maybe a column instruction line to multiple places within the design instead of having to rebuild this line over and over again. I've used that multiple times myself to customize, some pretty complex financial statements. Okay. Now this line here, this is a page break, and again, they wanted a break between assets and liabilities. So again, we did an insert and we did a blank. I'm sorry, not a blank, a page break. The other option you have here again is image. So as far as inserting things into the design, you've got the amount, the blank, the column, an image, a page break, or a total. I'm going to go ahead and save my design again. Notice it's got the little asterisk up here in the name. That's how you can tell it's got changes to it. And again, it's kind of like Report Designer. You want to go ahead and click your Save button as often as you can so that if something happens, you don't lose all the changes that you've made. I'm going to change my view here on the balance sheet, and I'm going to go to the header so that you can see a different section of the design. I want to show you the difference between these three lines. So this line with company name and brackets around it, this is actually a text field from the master file, while balance sheet is text that's been typed in. Period ending date is also from the GL master file. You can tell because it's got brackets around it. Now, to get to these types of fields, all you do is go to Design, Text Field. So you put your cursor on the line where you want to put the field, and you then Design, Text Field, and this will give you the list of text values that you can pull from the GL master file. So company name is in here, even some text with a date for the month ended, for the period ended. That's all there. There are quarters, period ending dates, beginning dates for period and quarter. For those of you that have prefixes, if you are using the same statement to print different prefixes within your company, instead of either having no title, let's see if I can do this for you. Instead of no title, so you have no idea which division or department or company this belongs to, we can put your prefix description in here. So you might have company name up here at the top, but then I'm going to insert a blank in here. Oops, I always do that. You have to be below where you want to go. So I need to be down here, and then I can do Design, Insert a Blank, and it puts it up above. All right, so here I may have my company name, but I need a prefix or a division or a department name to print here. So I can tell it, okay, go to Design Text Field and pull in the prefix description. And even though I only have one prefix in the sample data, I'll go ahead and pull this. You would see prefix group, A, B, C, however you've got those defined. You can pull that in. And then because we want this to line up here, we have instruction options that we can come to where we can say, okay, center this on the page, and maybe that's all we need. And it pulls it over and lines it up with the rest of the information. So I would get my company name to print, then the prefix description for that entity would print right underneath it, and then the words balance sheet, and then the period end date for the month that I'm in. So I could use this design over and over again and print it for multiple divisions or departments, and it would. This is a variable, so it will change with each prefix that I run this on. The other option, of course, is to have multiple designs and to hard code the department names in here or division names in here. I think it's easier, though, just to have the one design and have the system pull that in for you automatically. Right, so we'll save that. We'll come back to our body. Okay. There's also a footer. Don't forget that. And the defaults have this information here. If you don't want this, you can clear that out. So clear the instruction. Okay. Go back to the body. Go ahead and save it. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about prefix groups right now. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to kind of swap these around. We'll talk about prefix groups, and then we'll come back and talk about statement groups. So on page 10, if you take a look at Tools, Prefix Groups is right at the top. So for those of you that have prefixes, again, you need to have at least one prefix group so that you can run the design. Otherwise, you won't be able to print the design. Now, this one by default, they've created one called Single Statement, consolidating all prefixes. I've actually created a separate one for each of my companies. So I've got one for 10 and one for 21. Once you pick the prefix group or you name it and give it a description, then you're going to choose what type of group this is, whether it's a custom group or it's a single statement consolidating all prefixes, or it's a separate statement for each company. So it just depends on what you pick. And then the Enter Prefixes button will be available to you on the custom prefix group. You just click the button, and there's a place for you to tell it whether you want a single or separate statements, and then what prefixes do you want to pull. So on this one, I'm saying if I use this prefix group, I want a separate statement for 10 versus 21. Now I've also set up, again, separate statements or prefix groups, for 10 and 21 so that I can run those individually when I run the statement, or I'm going to set up something called an entity comparison here that kind of goes along a little bit along with the prefix groups. Okay. So remember in our income statement, we set up separate columns for Department 1, Department 2, and then we've got a horizontal total. Right at this point, the system doesn't know what goes in 1 and 2. If I were to run this, and I can run from right here, or I can switch over to General Ledger, and I can say, go ahead and go to Reports, Financial Statements, run the income statement for me. So if I pick one of these, and I'll just pick this one, I'm thinking, oh, well, there's 10 and there's 21. If I preview that, notice that my amounts here are the same in each column. It doesn't know to put Department 1 in the first column and Department 2 in the second column. And then, of course, I have doubled up my amounts here in the total, which we'll fix that in a minute. So in order to get around that, what I have to do back here in financial statement design is I have to tell it that this is an entity comparison statement. Now, this entity comparison can be on a design that only has one amount column in it, or it can be on one like this design that has two. Now, I'll get a warning that says, remember to get your prefix group on your numeric columns. So I'll okay that. And then I'm going to come in here and double click in my column line in the first department field. And notice that this prefix group field is now active. So I can say print prefix group 10 in that column, and over in department 2, print the other one. So I can go ahead and okay that. And I'll save it. And now when I go to General Ledger, Reports, Financial Statements, and I run that income statement, watch what happens. It doesn't ask me for a prefix group anymore. It already knows what the prefix groups are because of the design. So now when I do a print preview, I'm getting the correct numbers in each of these two columns. It's separated out company 10 in this column and company 21 in this column. Now I can do the same for the balance sheet. So let's say on my balance sheet design, go ahead and close this, bring up the balance sheet. Every time I run this, I'm constantly having to put in my consolidated prefix. I shouldn't have to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and on this design, I'm going to make it an entity comparison as well. And I'm going to come into the column identifier, and I'm going to say for the prefix group for this current balance field, I'm going to use a 1. That's a consolidated prefix group. So I'll okay that, save it, and I'll run this again from General Ledger. And this time I'll run the balance sheet. Again, it doesn't ask me for a prefix group. So when I do the print preview, I'm getting all of the departments added together. So this could be a nice step for you to add to your statements that maybe you have prefixes, but you're constantly having to add or select the prefix group. If you're always selecting the same prefix group for that design, make that design an entity comparison. Simply open it up and change this, check this, so that you lock those entities in, the prefix groups in, within the design itself. Okay, and the instructions for that are on pages 11 and the top of page 12. All right, let's talk about statement groups. So if I have a list of statements that I run the same ones every month or every quarter, and I've got a lot of them, it's not just 2 or 3. I might have 10 different versions of financial statements that I need each month or each quarter or at the end of the year. I can create a group called monthly statements. And then when you click the edit group here, it's going to ask you if you want to create it. Just say yes. And that brings in the designs that are out there. Now you might want to give this a description and just call it month-to-date amounts. And you might have one for the quarter and for the year. And then all you do is highlight the design and add it. So it adds it over here under this section called Designs in Group. So I might need the balance sheet and the income statement. Okay. And that's all you do. Just add these in, create one for the quarter, create one for the year. Maybe each division has its own set. It just depends on what your needs are. Once that's created, when you go back into General Ledger and go to Reports, Financial Statements, notice that the designs are not there anymore. It's changed the default to show you your statement groups. You can still print individual statements, just click the individual statement button, and that pulls up the all of your individual designs that you want to print. Now, one thing I want to point out on this screen, and most of you are probably already aware of this, on any of these designs, you can roll back. So if you need to reprint previous balance sheet or income statement from a previous month, you may. The rule here to remember is you can only go back over one fiscal year end. So if you need to go back further and cross more than one fiscal year end, you won't be able to do it with financial statement. You'll have to get a copy of an old master file, or maybe do something with Report Designer instead. The reason that there are this many rollbacks is that it just depends on where you are in the year. You may be in December of 2018. You should still be able to roll back to December of 2016, because I think that only goes back over one fiscal year end. So that's why there are so many here, not just 12. It just depends on where you are in the year. If you run a statement and you roll it back and you get like asterisks or pound signs in the amount columns on the design, that's what the problem is. You've tried to roll it back too far. All right, we talked about accumulators a little bit already. So again, under Tools, Accumulators. In this particular design, we've got we've got the default net income, and we're pulling the current balance field. I didn't point this out before. On this window, you can use your list button, and this field can be any field that's coming out of the GL master file. So we could maybe copy this and call this last year net income, and call this last year. And then we can change this field here. Instead of the current balance, we may want balance 1 year ago. And we can go down the line here and we can change that. Okay. And then we may have a design that we've created that is pulling all last year fields, or maybe it's comparing this year to last year. We now have an accumulator that will give us the net income last year. So now we've got two. You can have as many accumulators out there as you need. It just depends on. Oops, I didn't save it. Darn it. It just depends on what your needs are. Let me change this back here. So don't forget to hit your save button. Okay. All right, the last couple of screens I want to show you are kind of some customization type things with design options. Okay, so I'm going to open back up our income statement here. All right. We've looked at insert, we've looked at text, we've looked at instruction options. This is the same as double-clicking on a line. So as an example, I'm on this line. If I can double-click and I can get to column options, or I can go to design instruction options and I get the same thing. So there's two ways to get to that window. Most of the time you're just going to double-click. That's the easiest way to get to your instruction options. We've done entity comparison. This design has it. What we haven't looked at yet are design options. Okay, so on this first tab, this is at the bottom of page 12 in your handout. This description shows up when you are running the report. So if I go to financial statements here and I go to individual statement, this is what we're talking about right here. The description that prints next to the design name when you're actually printing the statement. So you want, if you're doing a brand new design, put something in here that will tell you what this design is supposed to do. You can control your dates, the date format, the heading, whether it's portrait or landscape. I'm going to switch this over to landscape since we kind of ran over the total, ran off the page. I could either do that or I could tell it to shrink to fit. We'll try it both ways. We'll do shrink to fit first. You've got some options here for the default font. You've also got page options, headers on the first page, footer on the first page, report or page number on the first page, and then what number to start the page numbering with. The amount, you've got symbols, dollar sign, percent sign, ratio. The currency symbol can either be floating, it defaults to floating, we can make it fixed. Decimal places will default to 2. You can change that. Zero amount values, if you don't want them blank, you can put in 0. And then your abnormal sign, if you, it's going to put brackets around the amount if it's abnormal. You can put some other symbol there if you'd like. And then we're printing commas. Under rounding, we're rounding to the nearest dollar. On this design, we could tell it no rounding. We want dollars and cents to print. Since we're not rounding, this rounding method won't make a difference, but if you are rounding, you need to be sure that you've selected the right option for the total line. So if we round each line, that's kind of the same as round and carry. So it's going to round it and then carry the rounding down to the total, or it's going to add down and then round, excuse me, to the total. So you may have to play with this depending on what the total at the end of each section is what you're looking for. All right, so we're going to change this to no rounding. We've got a fixed dollar sign that's going to print. We're going to print zeros. And here we're going to shrink to fit. Let's see if that pulls everything all onto one page. Okay, so notice now I've got my 0.99 on the end of all these amounts. And these might be just a hair too big. That's maybe why it's not. Oops, I don't want to go that way. I want you to shrink in this way. Okay, so see here, I'm just using my cursor to move these around because I may not need all that space. I don't need all of the width, doesn't need to be that big. I'll leave it that big for this line. This one, let's go in a little farther. Move it over. So you see you can play with these just to get these to look exactly how you want them to look. Oops. Let's go ahead and save that. And then we'll come over here and we'll print this. And we'll see in there. That pulls it in, but I didn't quite make this column wide enough. So what I may do here, let me close that, cancel out of here, come back here. I may move this over. Move this over. Let's save that. Go back to GL. Let's run it again. Preview it. That looks a little bit better. Okay, so I told it to shrink to fit. That's how we got everything all on one page, still in a portrait mode. I told it to print not a floating dollar sign. It's a fixed dollar sign. So instead of over here by the dollar amounts, they're out here on the edge. That's up to you when you're creating the design. Okay. All right, so let's look back here and see if we have any more places here that we need to review. Let me open the design back up. I closed it, I shouldn't have. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about we can cut and paste sections in a design, cut, paste, and copy. We can delete or clear instructions out of a design. We can view the header, the footer, and the body. We can insert amounts, blanks, columns, page breaks, totals. We can pull text fields in. These are predefined text fields. We just covered the design options. We can get to the instruction options by either double-clicking on the line or highlighting the line and getting to instruction options. Now, one thing we didn't talk about here was the assign total. If you already have a total line set up and you notice that something's missing here, I missed a line. I didn't get one of these to come down here, maybe here into the grand total. When you highlight the total line, you can come up here to design and go to assign total, and it pulls in your totaling options here, plus, minus, percent, and close. So I can redo any of these lines. So all I have to do is click on it. Okay. And then when I'm done, just click close. So the original total is done within design insert total. Changes to the total are done with design assign total while you're highlighted on that total line. Okay, under tools, we've covered prefix groups, statement groups, and accumulators. Those are the three extra pieces that will go with the design itself. And depending on your chart of accounts, you may or may not have to do prefix groups because you may not have prefixes within your company. And again, save your design often, just to make sure, especially if you've got a complex design and you're going in and you're changing accumulators and different amount lines and that, and if something happens while you're in there, you don't want to lose all of that work that you've done. So use your save button as much as you can. Okay. So that we've already covered that. So we're down to tips and reminders. Again, Amounts come from the GL master file only. No transactions, no other applications, files interface with the financial statement. Use the entity comparison option to your advantage. So if you've got a design that you are constantly selecting the same prefix every time you print it, turn that into an entity comparison and lock your entity in on the column instruction in the dollar amount fields. Budget fields. If you set budgets up, remember that you have access to those fields within the financial statement designer. Don't forget the header and the footer. You can put information into those sections. You can pull, one nice thing that I've seen people pull in is if you've got multiple financial statement designs, you can actually pull the design name into the header or the footer at the bottom, maybe at the bottom, along with the page number, so that you can see what statement design generated this particular statement. Okay. And that is customizing financial statements. It's kind of fun to play with. I would recommend that you go in, if you haven't already generated those default statements, go ahead and get those generated, and then make copies of those and go in and play with those designs. And actually, I was going to General Ledger to print, but you can actually here under File, Print, you can print the statement from inside here. It brings up the same window that you see in General Ledger. So as you're building your design, I would go ahead and stop every once in a while and actually print preview it or print to paper so that you can see how it's coming, how it's progressing. Okay? You don't have to switch over to General Ledger for that. All right, questions. We have a little bit of time, so if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask now, Tina, I'll let you read me any questions that might be in the chat area. And then, of course, you can always email Tina your questions after the class, and she'll forward those to me, and I'll be happy to answer. So, Tina, are you there?
Hey, hi, I'm here. Right now, I'm not seeing any questions in chat. Nope, nothing yet. So
nothing yet. Let's give them a minute.
Sure.
And then we'll go ahead and close the session.
Sounds good. Still not seeing anything, so I guess
okay.
Hit all the good parts.
All right. Well, if you haven't played with this program before, it can be fun if you like doing that kind of thing. The other thing to remember too is you can send these reports to Excel. I know a lot of you are probably doing your reports in Excel, but it might be easier to do it through the Financial Statement Designer because you can manipulate all the fields that are there with expressions and accumulators that you might not be able to do on the Excel side. All right, well, if you think of any questions, please let us know. Please email Tina, and she can forward those on to me, and I will be happy to answer for you. And thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you in another future session. Thanks.